Hi guys. Sorry, wasn't ready for the camera. Okay. So chapter 14 is our next kingdom, and it is Kingdom Plantae. And we're finally to organisms that you're really familiar with, plants, obviously. And so this is our second to last kingdom until, fourth quarter we get to the animal kingdom. This chapter is pretty short, and I'm going to run through it in a pretty straightforward way. I believe that a lot of this will be familiar to you from from life science when you guys were in the 7th grade, and we will kind of wrap this up before spring break, and so when we get back, we'll be done with everything but animals. But anyway, back to plants. So first off, some characteristics of plants. The big one that we've talked about throughout the year is that they are photosynthetic, which means that they are almost all, of course there's always exceptions, but almost all autotrophic, which means they are self-feeders, and that they use chlorophyll to make their own food. And that gives them their pigment, their green color. Of course, there are, the exceptions, the Venus flytraps that can do some photosynthesis, but they also will eat, flies or little bugs. But anyway, so that's how they feed themselves. Cellulose, again, we've mentioned multiple times. Plants, one of the components of their cell walls is cellulose, and it is kind of the crunch in the stems of different things, or in, the vegetables that hopefully you are eating. The cellulose is that crunchy part. Something we haven't really talked about is the cuticle, and this is on the outer surfaces of a plant's leaves, the stem, the fruit, whatever it is. They're covered by this kind of thick, kind of waxy layer. It makes, it can make some leaves look really shiny, or kind of give that kind of slick feel to the leaves and the stems. It is basically there to prevent water loss. And so so cuticle. All right, then the reproduction, we're not going to go into a ton of it, but it is kind of described as the alternation of generations, because plants reproduce sexually. So, male, female, egg, sperm. They reproduce sexually in a cycle that includes the formation of spores and then the formation of gametes. That's the egg sperm part. And so they go back and forth, and so it's the alternation. We won't go into a ton of it. If you take a botany class ever in your future, you'll go into a lot more of it. But just kind of know sexual reproduction. And then they do produce a multicellular embryo, and this is typically the fusion of the gametes, just like normal, will form the zygote, and then the zygote develops into this multicellular embryo through cellular reproduction, like mitosis, and then the embryo develops into a spore-forming fruit, basically. And so you have different things, and then those spores, of course, can develop into what we know as seeds. Okay, so classifying plants, there are a couple of ways that we will do this, and the first one is vascular or non-vascular. Vascular plants are plants that have tissues that can transport water and other materials. This is a very big advantage to those types of plants, because they can grow large. The redwoods, those are vascular plants because they have the ability to carry water from their roots all the way up to the highest leaf. And so trees, of course, flowers, bushes, typically, what you would say is a plant. You're probably most likely describing something vascular. Now, non-vascular don't have that vascular tissue, and so to get water and nutrients from their surroundings, they have to, first of all, live in an environment that has a lot of moisture in it, and they live very close to the ground, so they basically are absorbing it directly from the ground into the individual cells. And so the main examples of these that we're probably most familiar with are mosses, liverworts, hornworts. Those things to us would probably look like mosses, but they, are like the very, very close to the ground, very small small little plants. Well, okay, so then angiosperm or gymnosperm. Angiosperm are plants that produce flowers and fruits, and then those flowers and fruits can produce seeds or spores. This is the largest group of plants. All of these are vascular because they do get pretty big. They do have the tissue that carries water up from the ground. But their main thing is that you have some kind of enclosure around the seed. Gymnosperm plants produce seeds, but they are not enclosed in a fruit of some sort. The seeds themselves are usually on a cone. All of these are also vascular, can be very big. That's like a typical, like a pine tree is a gymnosperm. And so there's different advantages to being an angiosperm with the flowers or the fruits containing the seeds or the spores. That makes it easy for an animal to eat the fruit and carry the seed, in its digestive system far away until it goes to the bathroom and that seed is planted. Some protection for the seed and the spores in the fruit or in the flower. Gymnosperm seeds are obviously a little bit more open, but again are protected on a cone. Those cones, if you've ever, picked up a pine cone, have kind of sharp little edges to them, helps them kind of snag onto the fur of an animal as it goes by, and then the seed is transferred that way. So just different ways that they are made. Okay, so now the structure of the plant, the parts of the plant. First off, we have the dermal tissues. This is the outer layer, and it is called typically the epidermis is what we're seeing, and it is its job is to protect the plant, helps it retain water, but also release water as more comes up through that vascular tissue. It is the part of the plant that makes the cuticle, makes that waxy cover. It makes thorns that are on the stem anywhere, anything that's on the surface. In trees, this epidermis is dead. What you're seeing is dead, and they form the bark of the tree, the cork of the tree, and their function in those cells is to protect again, it's an extra hard layer, and then support the weight of the tree up above it. All right, vascular tissue is what we've been talking about with the vascular versus non-vascular. This is a transport system. It gets water and nutrients from one part of the plant to another. There are two types of vascular tissue: xylem, which is carrying water, and anything that's dissolved in the water, any dissolved nutrients. It carries that from the roots to the rest of the plant, and it carries it only one direction. It goes up. So it goes from the roots up to whatever is, above it in the plant structure itself. So the picture over here, so here is the xylem, and the little arrows, of course, show you which way it is going. Those red dots are the stuff that's dissolved in it, and that they're all going up. The phloem carries food two directions, and it depends on the season. So it carries the food from the leaves to the rest of the plant, and it can also carry that food from where it has been stored to the plant. And so during the spring and summer, the phloem carries the food from the leaves downward. So the leaves are green, they're going through photosynthesis, they're making, their glucose essentially. And so the food is carried down and stored in the roots or in a fruit or, whatever the plant is producing, or into storage. And during the winter, early spring, the phloem then carries the food back to the leaves, the stems, flowers, to be a source of energy to help them grow. So over here it shows you that. And so the two arrows you've got, and then you still do have water and food being carried, or water and, because the food is dissolved in it. This little picture over here is a cross section of a stem, and we'll talk about the tissues around, but you can see the dermal tissue right here is the outermost layer, and then that vascular tissue is right in the middle. Typically, plants can be classified by how the arrangement of the xylem and the phloem. If you look at this cross section, so this one it kind of forms like a plus sign or an X in there, with the xylem being lighter colored and then the phloem being the yellow around it. Different plants and different parts of a plant have a different structure, but they're together in the middle of, in this case, the stem of the plant. But they have different directions, or carrying things different directions sometimes. Okay, ground tissue. This produces sugars, stores materials, supports the plant. This is the tougher structure. It's outside of the xylem phloem we just talked about. And there are 3 types. You have the parenchyma, and this is where chloroplasts are. So photosynthesis takes place here. It also stores the products, the glucose, and then the cells can kind of put it together to make sugars. Collenchyma is thick cells. It's that middle picture on the page, but they are flexible, but they're support. They're often like, you can kind of picture them as like the strings in like celery. That is like collenchyma, and so it gives fiber to it. In some plants, like cotton plants, we take those fibers and spin them and make thread from them and cotton and all that kind of stuff. So they're pretty strong. And then you have the sclerenchyma, which are very thick support cells, much more rigid than the collenchyma, and so they are just that much more supportive. Okay, 4th type of tissue is the meristematic tissue. This is made of cells that really haven't become a specific type of cell yet, or a specific type of tissue. And so these are basically where things are growing. And, they'll grow and then decide, okay, I'm going to be part of a leaf, or, whatever. And then they will begin to develop those. But for a while, it's just growth. And you see this in areas of growth at the tips of the roots, and on the picture that's kind of labeled kind of like a little blue. All of that is meristematic, where buds produce, coming off the stem, where new leaves are being produced. Right now, if you go out and look at trees around your house or little bushes, it's not pictured blue, but you should start to see some buds, and those are showing, or that is where this growth is occurring. Okay, so now leaves. Leaves are where energy is produced. This is where photosynthesis takes place. It's also where oxygen is taken in. Excuse me, that's totally wrong. It is where CO2 is taken in and oxygen is given out through the stomata. The stomata are little holes on the underside of the leaf. As far as the leaf goes, there's two things I want you to just kind of be aware of. I know you know what a leaf is, but first off, the blade of a leaf is the broad part. Like, when you think of a leaf, you're picturing the blade. And then you have the petiole, and this is a little tiny stalk that attaches the blade to the stem. And not all plants have this, but on this picture, and we'll get to the type of leaves in a minute, this, if I can circle it, this little stem right there. So the one big main stem runs here, kind of up and down, and then all of the little stuff, let me erase that since it was so messy. Then all of the little stuff, or little stems, like right there, that is the petiole. And so you notice that some of them do, like this middle one right here does not have a petiole, excuse me. Okay, so leaves, types of leaves. You have simple, and it is not divided, so you just have one big blade. Palmate is when the leaf is divided into 2 or more leaflets. Pinnately compound is a leaf that is divided into multiple leaflets, and then they are connected directly to a stem. And then bipinnately compound, the leaf divides into leaflets, and then those divide even farther into smaller leaflets. So again, back to this picture, this is a leaflet, and then each little part of it is the smaller leaflets. All right, stems. So stems' jobs are connect the leaves to the roots. On a stem, you can have different features. You can have nodes, and those are at some point along that stem that will produce a leaf. So you can, again, right now is a good time to look for these. internodes or regions between the nodes, kind of like the word tells you. And then you have buds, and these are little structures at the nodes that will go on and develop into branches. Will lengthen, basically from the node, and then just keep going from there. Now, a couple types of stems. You have herbaceous stems, and these are similar to leaves. They have covered by an epidermis. They may have like the opening stomata and cells for photosynthesis, so they're green, and they primarily grow upwards. They don't get much wider, around, but they can get pretty long. So like think of like a weed, really. It has a herbaceous stem, and or a flower. Daisies are herbaceous. Anything that just kind of grows up. It's not real sturdy, but has that green stem to it, is herbaceous. Okay, so then we have a woody stem, and these have several different layers, and they are kind of what they sound like. These are like the trunk of a tree, the stems that are brown. And first off, they have a growth layer, which is meristematic. They have a growth layer that is called cork. And then you have the cork cambium that is right underneath it that produces these cork cells for support, for protection. And as these grow, they add to the diameter of the plant, so it keeps getting bigger across. And so this is where you hear people talk about the rings on when you cut down a tree. Typically it adds, one good ring like per year, per growing season. And you have the cortex cells, and these allow water to flow between the inner and outer tissue. And it's also, you can have some exchange of the gases with the environment. And so these are all, they're all there on that very top little part. So they're all pretty much to the outsider part of the bark of the tree. And then kind of in the middle of that, you have the vascular cambium, which is right here. And it's a very thin layer of this growth tissue, meristematic tissue, produces xylem and phloem. And it also is just kind of the separating line between the bark and then the wood, the wood of the plant. So when you cut down a tree, the bark all gets taken off for the most part, and what a carpenter or somebody who's building something with that wood is really wanting is that section right there. Okay, so now roots, almost done. So down at the bottom now, roots, anchor plants. This is where the stem starts, and then they grow up out of the roots. The roots are below ground. They absorb water from the ground, nutrients that are dissolved in that water in the soil. They also can store the food that is made in the leaves, and in some cases that root is actually what we're eating, like a carrot. In some cases not so much, but that's kind of the storage thing. And there are two main types of roots: the tap root, which is just one main root with little branches coming from it, or the fibrous system, which is many small roots like straight from the stem. And so the taproot, like I said, it's easiest probably for us to picture a carrot, which is what that is. Fibrous roots are like grass has fibrous roots to it. Like trying to pull out a weed, think about you're trying to pull up. Now some of them do have kind of a taproot, but the fibrous are, really diverse. Fibrous root systems are really good to stop like erosion of soil. They help trap in the dirt around them, but it kind of makes them hard to pull out. Okay, last thing, structure of a root. So you've got the tip of the root cap, and so this is where it grows. And then you have the layers, kind of like we've already talked about. You have the epidermis, and the root is covered in this epidermis tissue, and it at certain points will extend out into form root hairs, which are all these little hairs, obviously. This helps increase surface area, helps the plant absorb more water. Remember, in a lot of plants, you have fungus attached to those root hairs, and it just it increases the surface area even more, and so more water is absorbed. And you have the cortex, and this is where material is stored, so it's that middle layer in here. It helps pull in water and minerals. It's made of ground tissue, so very thick, supportive cells that can store if needed. And again, that's, excuse me, what you eat when you're eating a carrot. And then you have the endodermis, and that is the inner layer. And these are cells that are very tightly packed. They help to control what's going into, from the cortex into the vascular tissue. And so, you know, it controls the amount of water that is going in, the amount of nutrients, then of course that absorb that water that are going in. And it's just kind of the barrier between, you know, in and out. On my picture, the purple and blue and or excuse me, pink, blue and red. Hello, I don't know my colors. And yellow in there. The red is the endodermis, and then the xylem and the phloem are in there. Some of this red and kind of that's in between, but then the phloem is the yellow. So it, again, different arrangements and different parts, but they're very similar in structure as you go from root to stem in particular, and kind of what their insides look like. Okay, that's plants for you, kids. Let me know if you have questions, and I will see you in class.